Oh, hi there. Last time I showed you how I had great difficulties making the coaming on the front cockpit, this one. This time I'm going to work on the back cockpit instead, this one, and I'll show you a more easy way to make it, or at least a less difficult way to make it. So this is the way to do this type of coaming. First, you set up a mold for the first layer of glass. In this case, I use a PVC tube that I have cut to fit the hole. I space clamps to make room for glass in between the clamps. Still enough clamps to hold the tube in place. I prepare by cutting the glass I need and make sure it is enough, before starting to wet out the cloth. I use a bit of cotton fibers in the epoxy to make it less fluid. With a roller it is easier to remove air. Then I lay out the cloth as smooth as possible. Around the cockpit between the clamps. With the wide strips of masking tape, I make sure the bend makes a smooth transition in under the deck. After curing, I remove the clamps and the tape. Clean cut the edge and start over again. Now with the clamps over the already cured areas. I laminate the leftover areas around the cockpit in the same way. Let it cure and remove the clamps and the tape, as well as clean cut the edge. I use carbon fiber for the next layer, but that is actually a waste. You can use glass all the way through the coaming, 4 layers of cloth. It is no visual difference in the final result. With the already cured layer as a support, I lay out 5 layers of glass in total. The carbon layer does not bind well all around, so I really suggest you skip that first carbon layer. Or you have to clamp it together as I did here before adding the next layer. Using a third vinyl glove as a disposable glove, I smear out the cloth, pressing out air bubbles. With tape I get a smoother bend, but it is hard to remove if you let it sit more than 16 to 24 hours. Under the coaming I smoothen the bend using thickened epoxy and glass in some thin areas. Outside the winter has come, so it's no problem getting hot when sanding the coaming. This is important to even out the surface and to see where more material is needed. The edge is also trimmed from below. And most of the coaming under the deck is removed due to weight purposes. With thickened epoxy, small strips of glass, more thickened epoxy and more glass, I prepare for a smooth inside bend using a bicycle tube. When it is pumped up, the epoxy is pressed in place. At the same time, I take care of low spots, using small pieces of 300 gram glass. The day after, I let the air out. Clean cut the edge. Before quickly removing the tube. The low spots get another go. Also thin areas are strengthening from below using clamps. There are some areas that were not totally smooth, and I add a second coat of thickened epoxy. Press it in place with the tube, but let it cure upside down this time to fill out other areas. The day after, I flip the deck. Let out the air. Loosen the tube. The first part is a bit tricky, but when it is loose in one end, it's easy to pull off. The turning also needs sanding. Using a string of emery cloth, I get the turning smoother. This is actually rather hard labor as you hold the arms far apart. Frequent breaks are needed. As I still think the shape is not perfect, I add more thickened epoxy, together with glass on the low spots. The turning also needs improvement. The high spots needs more material from below. This is not easy, so try to stay away from this. With the help from the tube, I get it in place, sort of. Then I add air. Wait until cured and proceed. With the thickened epoxy, I add thickness from below. In the shaping of the final form, I start with rounding the edge. Then I take the outside of the coaming and make it flat. I look at each layer from the side so the bending gets smooth. In the turning, a small sander had been better, but I work with what I got. I belt sand as far as possible. And hand sand only in the very sharpest bend. Using a smaller and smaller surface area. With an oscillating rasp, I remove spillage on the deck. Round the edge and straighten the visual appearance of the edge. The fillets also gets a sanding, as well as under the deck. This is mostly to remove excess weight, but also to get a smooth surface for the paddler, moving inside. For the final carbon layer, this is 160 gram biaxial that wraps around very well. I cut pieces that will take the band and spread them around the coaming. Also 160 gram twill woven glass is cut. I pre-wet the surface and wet out the cloth. The roller is too aggressive and I use a pencil to keep the cloth together. As I pick up the wetted cloth, I soak the next piece in the remaining epoxy. Carefully place the cloth on the coaming, removing air bubbles by hand, before adding the wetted out glass. This is to get a sanding layer on top of the carbon. After 9 hours I clean cut the edge. Still a bit soft but not so sticky. I want to add a second coat as soon as possible to limit sanding. The leftover epoxy is mixed with cotton fibers and used to improve the turning. This is the third pressure sequence on the fillet. After 4 hours I add the third coat of epoxy. Remove air pressure and the tube, before adding the fourth layer of epoxy later in the afternoon. The edge of the final layer is trimmed to remove obvious unevenness, also from below. Then the exact 4 cm width of the coaming is shaped. The edge is rounded and the fillet is trimmed with emery cloth. A rounded rasp and a wire brush. The top is carefully sanded with a 80 grit paper. Now the last coat. I let it cure and I'm done for this time. Later I will paint under the coaming with a black color. Thank you for watching. See you next time.